cold-blooded with no heart and no love to give. I tried and not tried alone. So cold and no trust and no hope. We both know when trust is broke, it's time to go. Could have been another way, caught up in the dumbest things. Didn't want to entertain being here anyway. Fighting every day like it's necessary breathing. Adding up the right and wrongs, trying to keep it even. Every difference of opinion didn't help, they were reasons. And every time we got to yelling, someone's always leaving. Maybe we weren't meant to be, couldn't handle mentally. And maybe you were meant to leave, but I'm just matching energy. I wish I was your everything, I wish I had a remedy. Wish that we could work it out instead of be an enemy. I'm sorry I ain't sorry or I wasn't what you wanted. I try to keep it 50-50, but I'm better at 100. So close but so far and so on we must go. Goodbye and so long, I'm sorry but no more.
Hello and welcome to the Q&A for Let's Remember Our Ancestors. My name is Arjang Zafar. I'm one of the program directors at PATH. And Neil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Neil Tinkham, the director and editor of this short film, Hasso Manaina, or Let's Remember Our Ancestors. Thank you.
All right, so we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to try to get to the important stuff. I guess, can you give us sort of a rundown, generally speaking, of how this project, both in terms of the documentary and the sort of project depicted within it, like how these things came about?
So I was reached out to by the Pacific Islanders and Communications. They were trying to find content to put together, showing, just little snippets of the Pacific Islander experience through COVID. And, I remembered this organization, the Couture and Chamorro Foundation, which is based in Long Beach, California. And talking with their executive director, we were trying to find, what, sort of things, how were they affected by it? Because this is a large organization, comprised of many Chamorros, right? And so Chamorros are the natives of the Pacific island of Guam. And there's many that live here in southern LA and Southern California. And their, activities were severely affected by the shutdown. And so one of the things that they wanted to do to continue their mission was to have members create an in-language chant. But because, everyone had to remain socially isolated, right? This was something that had to be done over Zoom. And so, this seemed like a great story to tell, right? Because we could see the process, from the very beginning to the final recording, and see, all of the challenges that come with, doing something virtually. Because we're all very familiar with, meeting on Zoom and all of that, right? That's become like, how we interact now. And so it was, just to kind of show like the challenges and then the successes, of that process. And a lot of them, they didn't even know how to, make a song, write lyrics or anything like so. It was a very new thing for many of them. So it was a lot of fun to watch.
Okay. Would you say that, like even before the pandemic, in general, like obviously, like increasingly we're all relying more on virtual communication. Would you say that was having an impact on, and in any way it was having an impact on the way like the Chamorro people were experiencing and like perpetuating their cultural traditions, or was it more of like a stark like, this is what's happening now because it's like we have no other choice?
Yeah, definitely. Because the Couture and Chamorro Foundation, they would normally meet every week and practice together for, upcoming like cultural festivals and things like that, where they would go and perform as a group. And, as you can imagine, right, when there's singing and dancing, that's something that we, normally do as a collective. So to no longer be able to meet in order to do that was a huge blow to a lot of these people, because just in general, we're a very social group, right? We like to gather, to eat, celebrate, anything, right? We always like to come together. And so that was, a real challenge for them. And then also, right, okay, well, how can we continue this? You know, it was a completely new experience for them. But, you know, we, you know, managed to kind of, you know, do it, and they're still meeting. You know, we finished this, you know, like almost a year ago, and, you know, they're continuing to meet every week to continue, you know, practicing their dances and their songs and things like that, just to continue their mission. And then, you know, whenever everything opens back up again, you know, they'll be able to kind of just, you know, meet and then continue on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So obviously, like this short documentary, it focuses a lot. I mean, it relies a lot on sound. So can you talk a little bit about the sound design and like that whole process?
Yeah, well, so we were pretty lucky to have like a professional sound engineer in the group. And so, you know, he's you know, born and raised on Guam. He moved out here, and, you know, he's now working at Sony. And so, you know, this is kind of like, you know, his background, and also the teacher, right? The main instructor, right? He's also a sound engineer. So we had that benefit, and so we were able, you know, through their input to figure out, you know, how do we do, you know, the final recording, because everything up until that point, right? You know, I was just, you know, recording over Zoom and, you know, just pulling audio from those clips. But when it came to the final recording, you know, the trick was, you know, how do we make it seem like everyone is singing together in the same space when in fact everyone is, you know, separate. And so what we did was they came up with the idea to have everyone just record themselves separately on, you know, like a cell phone. You know, so we get their Zoom desktop or laptop footage, and then we also get footage of them on their cell phone. And so we take the audio from the cell phone recording, which is a little bit clearer, and then they were able to just kind of collect all of that and then layer it so that it sounded like everyone was singing together in the same space, when in fact, you know, it was like 10, 15 separate recordings of people singing on their own. Yeah. So
I see. Okay. And so I'm wondering, given the sort of the title of the short and the central sort of, I think, piece that is sung, is obviously calling into mind ancestors. And I was curious if you could kind of provide some context on like the relationship of that idea and that song or those songs to this project.
yeah, sure. So the lyrics, right? The lyrics are in Chamorro, right? But if you translate them, right, the song is about remembering our ancestors, and so that's, you know, kind of like the literal translation of it. And the writing process for that was everyone that was taking part would, you know, offer their own, you know, set of lyrics, you know, their own set of bars. And we found that, you know, the common theme that everyone was providing, right, not knowing what the song was going to sound like, you know, not knowing how it was going to be, you know, composed, right, but everyone was just, you know, almost just, you know, freestyling. You know, there was those common themes of, you know, just connection to our ancestors, you know, connection to each other, and, you know, how we continue what, you know, our ancestors started through, you know, this, you know, cultural practice that we do, and through, you know, this creating of a chant, because, you know, that's a very traditional art form. And so, you know, it was just kind of, I think, you know, maybe it's because it was COVID and everyone was separated, and going through this process, you know, it was a very emotional experience for a lot of them, you know, as they were coming up with their lyrics, and, you know, maybe being reminded of those that have passed away. And so, you know, we wanted to kind of honor them and, you know, honor this tradition, because, you know, we're always being pushed forward by, you know, those that came before us. And so this was, you know, just kind of like a way to acknowledge that.
For sure. And now, sadly, we have to start wrapping up. But real quick, I just wanted to ask you, as we close, how can we follow your work, and what's next for you?
Yeah. So I did provide an Instagram link to the cultural organization. So it's called the Couture and Chamorro Foundation. So you can follow them on Instagram. They're always putting out a lot of great content, that's, related to them or related to, like Guam. And so, they're definitely someone worth following. And, for me, just kind of, keep riding this wave and, see what else comes next, right? There's always something coming up next. So yeah, we'll see what it is.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much, Neil. As Neil mentioned, you can follow the Couture and Chamorro Foundation on Instagram. And if you want to look at more of PAF's festival program this year, obviously you can go to paf.org. Thanks
Great.
again.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right.
And now we are joined by Anthony. Anthony, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, Anthony is the director of Cane Fire, and that's the Q&A that we're taking part in now.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from Queens, New York right now. Cane Fire was a feature documentary I worked on for almost 6 years, and yeah, I'm excited to be included, and yeah, excited to talk with you, Arsene.
Cool. And now, just before we begin, I did want to mention that Cane Fire was chosen as the recipient of this year's Vijay Mohan Social Change Award at PAF. And I know that you've received similar attention elsewhere. So I just wanted to say congratulations, and obviously we're super grateful that you
thank you so much.
Have us screen this film this year.
Yeah, thank you so much for the award. It really means a lot.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's see. To start, I would like to ask about, well, let me put it this way. So Cane Fire is, it's simultaneously like a historical documentary, but it's also very personal. So I wanted to start by asking, in terms of the process of developing this idea, did you initially know that you wanted to tell a story about your own family, and then it sort of outgrew into something that was more about the history of Kauaʻi? Or was it sort of more the reverse, where you knew that you wanted to tell that history and realized that this sort of narrower personal lens was the way to go? And then from there, if you could kind of just talk about how that process developed and led to this film existing.
Yeah, so it was really following where we thought the story was going. And I say we, it's my co-producer and co-writer, Mike Vass, who worked on me with a previous project that was also about the sugar industry. We had done a short documentary about the Domino Sugar Factory in Brooklyn, New York. And when I was doing research, I was doing more research on just the overall history of the sugar production at the time. And I found family connections to Puerto Rico, extracting sugar for the Domino Sugar Factory, and then understanding more the history in my family in Hawaii. And so after we finished that film, I was just very curious just to grab a camera and talk to my great uncle Henry, who was driving a truck to the different mills, and had grown up in the plantation housing. My grandfather as well, and it started very small of being drawn to that, having a reference for it, but then being really honest of from that entry point, expanding it and talking to more people and seeing that, well, the sugar history was a major industry and it was part of the story. It started with my great grandfather immigrating from the Philippines. And so first it began like these major shifts of industry from sugar and pineapple production to tourism to this now phase of luxury real estate, speculative real estate, and seeing, kind of looking at the history from there and kind of following where it goes and really not knowing how it was going to expand. And it did start from that general interest in doing a general history, but it really did start just with my great uncle Henry. So when you see me at the house when I'm talking to him, it really it started that small. And then with him being involved with the Hollywood films and my great grandfather in this parallel history, it was looking at not only the material history of the island over 4 generations of my family, but also the representation through Hollywood films happening simultaneously in other media representations with user created media in contemporary today.
Right. So kind of to jump off of that, the film you're talking about, you mentioned material history, and like the film I noticed sort of seems to draw a line between like the sugar and pineapple industries and then the film industry and the tourism industry. Like these things are obviously very intertwined in the history of Kauaʻi. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk about I guess some of the intentionality of the way you depicted that history, and maybe provide some additional thoughts about the relationship of those things.
Sure. Yeah. So when I was looking at the labor history, looking at my great-grandfather's involvement in organizing and union strikes and involvement, you were looking at these major, the big 5, the sugar companies that formed the HSBA, this Hawaii Sugar Planters Association. They were fighting against the workers, and they did it in a variety of ways. And what I thought was most interesting was, since I'm doing a film, to investigate how they did it in forms of propaganda, of creating these South Seas fantasies, how to tell it in a filmic way. Not to say that it was the most important thing, or they did many things, many.
Sure. Yeah.
It's but how to tell that story in a way filmically, and also how it transitioned from these companies into the United States, their interest in creating a state, statehood, the military presence, and also controlled the Hollywood films that were coming in, the message, being very deliberate on the messaging of those. So it felt like this kind of parallel, this history of the island, and how one commented in the other, and what was relevant, what wasn't relevant, what feels like nostalgia or conflicted nostalgia to people that live in Kauaʻi when they're looking at representations of themselves on the island. That felt like a through line to investigate, because it's just you're watching this dramatization happening, and there are films that are referencing these very pivotal points in Kauaʻi's history, and how are they doing it and why.
Right. And obviously in the process of kind of putting that collage of ideas together, like you ended up using a lot of archival footage, and I guess I'd like to know, like, can you talk a little bit about, like, for you, the utility of archival footage in general, and also, like, logistically, what was the process like of, like, figuring out what you wanted, getting it, putting it together?
Sure. Yeah. I think that is putting in different categories of archival, right? There's the big blockbuster films, there's user generated contemporary YouTube footage, there's old archival film of actually filming the plantation, from industry, filming the plantations themselves. So it was tricky to kind of edit or navigate, what is each source saying, and how can we recontextualize or make it a straightforward, kind of guiding the audience of how to see this footage, or how to introduce it. So, how to create with all these oral histories that I'm collecting, talking to people, how to weave that in and out with, this large scale production at the same time, these kind of moments of rupture and this large scale that kind of hint to something else, is another reality that's happening. And the next phase, being this, the YouTube archive, which what I would do is just once a week, search whatever was coming through on YouTube, and what you see, what I pick is really kind of like the tip of the iceberg. Like there's so many things that are in the theme of this. Like I chose the videos that kind of encapsulated so much that I was seeing that felt like a trend that was commenting on this kind of this nostalgia that maybe the creators didn't even know what they were pulling from, and kind of bring it all together.
Yeah. And you mentioned obviously the user generated stuff, and I wanted to kind of highlight a particular clip that you put in the film, which stood out to me sort of. And it was this YouTube clip that's sort of near the midpoint of the movie, where it's like a sort of tourist vlog from someone who's visiting Kauaʻi. And I assume you know which clip I'm talking about. But
Right.
I'm wondering if you could sort of tell me about, I guess, like the process of you finding that, and then like what you were thinking about when you like decided to include it.
Yeah, for that one, and that was in for a long. I mean, that was in the edit for a long time, so it has been sitting in the film. It was kind of like where it was a good place for it, and it was, not so much about like trying to shame this one person and like, oh, look, this bad behavior, but it felt very indicative of kind of like the exchange. It's like the tourist is made to feel comfortable, and at all costs. Like that they come in, and then it's kind of film everything as they go. And it just felt like there's so many videos that are like that. This felt like the total encapsulation where everything was kind of in one little bite. So it felt like to show that video, you would get the idea like, oh, this is an everyday occurrence. This is the tour ship. The ship comes in. The interaction is that this person needs to feel comfortable and behave however they want. Like this is all kind of their whatever they want to comment on. It's to make them comfortable at all costs, and then they take off. And it's it just felt like early on it hit so many things, and people had such a visceral reaction to it. And I think it just is, it like hits the note.
That makes sense. Now I'm wondering, like, given that, and sort of given how you were talking about sort of reckoning with the people on Kauaʻi, sort of like looking at media depictions of themselves and reckoning with that to some degree, like, I guess, how would you describe the sort of dichotomy between the sort of perspectives on the island as seen from non-locals, like filmmakers and tourists, and the people who actually live there, in terms of like its depiction?
Well, it's kind of a provocation of saying that, it's not getting it right, or that people that live there are just extras, because it's like, it's kind of a thing that, it's a reflection of a material history. And, to even say, well, there needs to be a film where another person is a star. It's kind of like this, kind of the tanglement of it all. Like I think when I talk to people, it is interesting, because I'll have conversations where people that are saying, well, what is a film that you think is, indicative of what it's like? And I don't get, people aren't that enthusiastic with a lot of larger films, but myself personally, just in making this film, I've come across so many amazing Hawaii-based filmmakers that I feel like really hit the mark, but maybe my family members, be harder for them to seek out. So we're talking about like, large, like mainstream blockbusters. I don't hear much enthusiasm for. I think some people say The Descendants is something. They're like, well, they at least acknowledge this, kind of history. but I think it's still from the point of view of George Clooney, like, you know, the the burden that he has as the antagonist of the story, and anyone that has an opposing view to him as the antagonist that's the point of view of the film. So it's kind of a hard thing to answer. You know, it's like the conflicted nostalgia part, I think, is that, you know, someone that lived from a certain era will see a film with Charlton Heston, like Diamond Head, which is in same arc as The Descendants. Actually, is Charlton Heston is the main character, and even though he's seen as like a problematic character, he's still the main character of the film. But people that live in Kauaʻi could say, oh, you know, I knew that, or this captured this area or this mill or this place, you know, there's a nostalgia because it's like, oh, I'm seeing this in this beautiful Technicolor widescreen. They are taking things from it, and maybe they aren't taking the whole story and then the other deeper implications of it. But you know, it's kind of just taking memories, and then, you know, I guess that's the conflict of it.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And would you say that you felt personally a responsibility to depict Kauaʻi and its history in any particular way? Or did you feel obligated to, was there any obligation that you felt in depicting it at all?
Yeah, I think that being a very personal film, I wanted to, you know, make sure that you know, my family felt comfortable with it, and it came from what I was filming with them came out of long conversations and things that were important to them. I really wanted to be conscious about you know, and with other people as well, like the Native Hawaiian activists, you know, be very aware of the power dynamic, and, like, you know, that I am coming in and filming this experience. I think with the Native Hawaiian activists in particular, they were in part of an action that they wanted to draw attention to and show, demonstrate what's possible. And so with them in particular, it was the agreement was that we'd have this exchange where I told them, okay, this is my interest, you know, in this larger film, which might not correlate to, you know, their overall, what they want to focus on, and like in an activist sense. So the agreement was that I would give them the footage of what I shot to edit however they wanted, for their own purposes. And, you know, unfortunately, you see in the film, it you know, came apart. They were evacuated from the space, that never came together. So I don't actually know what that would look like, but that felt like the right exchange. And I think it was kind of unique with each person I was filming, this kind of like, can this person represent themselves outside of this film, and like to be very deliberate about how I present people in this kind of exchange. It felt like so much of the research and who I was talking to was guiding the film, that I think that it was just kind of being honest with what felt like the most, you know, interesting conversation. So there was it just kind of flowed after a while, like what felt right to focus on.
Right. You mentioned the research process. So I'd like to ask, like, what were some things, what were the most sort of maybe surprising or impactful things that you found out, or just general trends that it really like affected you learning about, both in terms of learning about your own family as well as the sort of the history of the labor struggle?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. There were 3 texts that really stood out for me. I think the thing that like really propelled the film the most was I read a book called, I mean, it's really just an oral history. It's a collection of interviews done in 1996 It was called The Autobiography of Protest in Hawaii. And it's by these writers that are conducting interviews with a diverse group of people that live in Hawaii. And it really felt like all these issues that they were hitting is just, it felt like the start of where we're at now, like this kind of new era. And it really struck me that like, oh, this is the thing that's like unsolved that people are still talking about now, starting in the 90s. This talking on the sovereignty movement and the labor movement. It's like it really kind of put things into perspective, and that was probably. I think because I was talking to people before I read this book and then reading this book, like, oh, this is a conversation that's been going on for a long time. And it kind of gave everything a little bit more weight and or more momentum. I think also Hollywood's Hawaii, that's a text by Dalila Konzet, and she, it's not just Kauai, but all of Hawaii. She really did a lot of research on how the U.S. shaped kind of the films in Hollywood and how they were, it was this pro-war message and pro-statehood message that they were approving. And, was what made it conflicting was that, or maybe more complicated and maybe hard to introduce in the film is, there were times when Hollywood is very proactive about having multiculturalism, having diverse people, but it was kind of always in aid of statehood, like showing people of diverse backgrounds only for this one goal. And then once that was over, they went back to a more segregated view of diversity in Hollywood, and then had to be fought for again. It was this kind of cyclical process. Mm-hmm. And learning about that and knowing that it's things happen in these kind of circles, and it's always a bit more complicated and sometimes hard to convey.
Right. So I would elaborate a little on that and ask, both in terms of the labor movement and the sovereignty movement, and obviously a lot of this is touched on in the documentary itself, and I don't want to undermine the text of the film, but since you're here and you can maybe answer a little bit more concisely, like what in those movements has changed in the history that you're depicting, and what would you say is still the same?
I think that, it was, when I was first doing research, I was looking at basically looking like, okay, here's this labor movement that found a way to basically, through negotiations, through struggle, through strikes, to create a basically in this era of it's created a middle class and this whole empowerment for the sugar and pineapple workers, but it was in the structure of statehood, and it was hard to navigate. Well, there's people, Native Hawaiians that have a different relationship to the land. How can these two groups be in solidarity with one another? Are there shared interests? There's different interests. There's many cases of solidarity between groups in tenants movements in the 70s in Oahu, and there's, it kind of feels like it's hard. It's like I want to bring this level of, okay, here's wanted to conjure up this feeling in the film of potential for solidarity without going too far into the history of the trying to look forward, I guess, with without going too much into like what worked and what didn't work. It's kind of like, well, what can we take from the past and like move forward in a way, with this next generation, with this whole idea of we can't, with the plantation workers, this idea of upward mobility is no longer a vision. We have this limitation of the climate. We have to look at living on the islands differently. And there's visions of, you can take something from the labor movement and the sovereignty movement. And I think that there is a lot in common, and there's something that needs to be, to come together in that way. And I think that's what the film is pointing towards, is like, we can't go back and like redo a model of something that happened in the past, but we can use some of those things to look forward.
Right. Okay. So I guess as we sort of start to wind down, I want to ask, if people are watching this film and they're sort of wondering, they want to know, like, what more can I find out? What more can I do? I'm wondering, like, what sort of resources, other media, organizations, or even just like calls to action of any kind would you like recommend to people that like want to further like pursue this stuff?
Well, I used to, I don't know if they're still active right now, but Corona Care Hawaii was doing a lot of direct action for people that were in need during the height of lockdown in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Food bank services, medical supplies. I think that, there's many, maybe more so in Oahu. I don't know. I always would point to them, but I'm not sure. But they're the first ones that come to mind for sure. I think the DSA group in Honolulu is very good and conscious about, tenants' rights, also with respect to sovereignty issues in Hawaii. I think those are the two that come to mind first, I think.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of like other media that people could look into.
Oh, just in general, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that Joan Lander and Pui Pao. Pui Pao has passed away, but they're a documentary team that has been doing films for many, many years, and they've documented many movements, protests. You see in my film an excerpt from their film for the Waimanalo eviction, and you see Pui Pao at the end narrating. They have this vast archive. When they looking at the protests and the occupation at Mauna Kea in the Big Island, they had been filming this for a long time, and I think their film, I don't know if it's still on the Criterion channel, but there's a great, they were showing a film that Joan Lander and Pui Pao did about Mauna Kea that's very, very good. That is from 2005, and it's gained momentum, and there's other films done about it. But that's, I think, very strong. And I don't know if it's still on the Criterion channel as well, but there's a collection of Hawaiian shorts as well. I think just following looking at past works that they've both done, starting in, probably the 80s. Just very patient, observant documentation. That's holds up it's very powerful.
Right. Cool. Thanks. And in terms of yourself, to close things off, I just want to ask, how do we follow you and your work, and what is next for you?
Sure. Well, I guess my website is easiest. It's just anthonysimon.net. And then I update it with festival screenings or whatever's new. I'm working on a few things, but I guess that's relevant to this film. I'm trying to put out a short documentary that's a companion to Cane Fire, called the Experiment Station, and that's focusing just on the biotech industry in Kauaʻi, which came out of the sugar and pineapple industry. So they would lease the land for hotel development, but also if there was any industrial agriculture that was still happening on Hawaii, it's the biotech industry of Dow DuPont, Syngenta, Monsanto. They're testing pesticides on the islands, and so it's kind of a long view of the impact that it's had on residents, which is it has a long history to it, and I think that I'm trying to release it online with the theatrical release of the film, and so yeah, that's probably the next thing.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing it. So yeah, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Anthony, again, both for being here and in general, for putting this all together. Again, just to close off, I want to mention that if you are interested in any of our other programs, and you have not bought tickets, you can do so at path.org, and you'll also find our live stream schedule there. So thanks everyone for tuning in.
Okay, thank you, Abraham.